Laurence, you said it's hard to have a short-term fix in Formula One. And I think that that's an interesting way to phrase it when you're looking at what's going on at Mercedes. And there was ominous quotes, as we know, from Bahrain. Immediately after the Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton was surprisingly chipper for a moment, but then a quote, this week has really, I think, caught a lot of people's attention because last season, I don't know if you guys got this sense, but it felt like even with some of the strategy, Lewis wasn't always on board and he was questioning reasons to pit and entire, degradation and different things. I always wondered what those conversations around the car were, in debriefs and whatnot. His quote was, "I've driven so many cars in my life. I know what a car needs. I know what a car does not need." I think we can all agree there. I think it's really about accountability. It's about owning up and saying, yeah, you know what? We didn't listen to you. It's not where it needs to be. And we've got work to do. What did you guys make of that pretty telling quote, I think, calling out his team?
It was interesting, wasn't it? Because like you said, he was chipper on the Sunday and we couldn't quite, I think we mentioned this last week, that no one ever seemed to be kind of aligned in what they were saying at Mercedes. Mm-hmm. Somebody was positive, somebody was negative, somebody was middle of the road. Maybe there was some method to that madness. I don't know. But yeah, it was surprising. And, like you said, Katie, it picked up traction this week. It's interesting when you look at Lewis as well, because he has such a high level of what he expects from that team, and strategy in terms of development, just in everything. I remember at the start of last season, he was asked a question about, if he's worried the team might have taken a wrong step, or maybe it was the year before. I'm pretty sure it was last year, and his quote was, "My team don't make mistakes," and it was kind of the big quote going into that test. And it shows you that he has that belief. He's like, no, and he was always, to his credit, he was always very fast. I know people kind of joked, we've got the best fans, the best team, but when he was on that winning run, he was very quick to always point out, it's the team. I'm part of this big team that's doing this. And I think he's one of the best drivers for doing that. People sometimes doubt his sincerity, but if you look throughout his time at Mercedes, he's been like that. So when they're in this situation they're in now, I think that him being very, very determined, his kind of almost perfectionist attitude comes across as if he's kind of calling the team out publicly. And I think that it's interesting because I think the way the team responds to it is always, would always be the key thing. I think Toto Wolff kind of appreciates when people are very, very frank and very, very straightforward. Mm-hmm. They released a public letter as well, didn't they, Mercedes, to their fans, kind of in the wake of that, just to say, look, things aren't, things are fine, kind of manage that a little bit. But yeah, it was very interesting. And I think I don't when I see quotes like that from Lewis, I think Laurence and I have been in F1 long enough to know that Lewis, he's a straight shooter. He says things as raw as they are in his head at that point. And sometimes they can come across, if you're reading them just, in the cold light of day, you look at it and think, well, he's throwing Mercedes under the bus here. He's calling them out. When I think it actually is, he's got that level of expectation. He's obviously had doubts about this concept, going way back to last year. And I think now there's almost a kind of, I told you so kind of attitude to it. And he's almost like, let's now listen to the drivers, the guy that knows, the guys that know what they're talking about in terms of what a car feels like. And yeah, it was on a the quote itself was on a podcast, it got picked up a bit later after he'd made the comment. But again, to go back to what you said at the top there, he said that maybe an hour or so after he was telling everybody, yeah, everything's fine, everything's great. So it just shows you, the right question, the right microphone in his face at the right time, and he'll give you that quote. So it's really interesting with Lewis. I've always found that quite fascinating about him. He's very difficult to read, and you're never sure what kind of statement you're going to get and whether who it's aimed at, if it's aimed at anyone. Sometimes it's him just saying what he thinks at that point.
Is a letter to fans commonplace?
I've not seen one for a long time. I don't know, Laurence might remember better. I think Mercedes have quite a unique relationship with their fan base online. I think them and McLaren have a really engaged fan base compared to, say, Red Bull or even Ferrari. I think Ferrari, maybe they'd do the same thing. I don't know. But Mercedes have this very, very passionate support on social media. And I think that it's just I think they've just been getting so much abuse for their admins on the social media accounts that run those things. I think they thought, right, we've got to get out ahead of this. But they've done things like that in the past, I think. But maybe I'm missing an obvious example that Laurence will recall, but I can't think of anything.
The one that always springs to mind is Zach Brown's done a number of letters,
of course,
open letters to fans, not always on McLaren, sometimes on the state of Formula One, and kind of, as a way of directly speaking to the fan base rather than going through us journalists, I think that's sometimes the idea when a team believes that the message they're trying to put across is being lost in translation a little bit through the steps that these quotes sometimes take, and they want to set the record straight somewhat. That's a way of doing it. But I was a bit surprised by Mercedes doing it, after one race, and it was almost apologetic in tone, which I think is unusual for a team after one race. But then again, it shows you how high Mercedes set their expectations and where they want their team to be, and where it is right now isn't good enough. So, I think that speaks a lot to why they put that out there.
I think it's.
Laurence,
sorry. I think it's easy to be cynical, like Laurence says, but I actually kind of thought it was quite impressive. There's this kind of attitude of like, we'll put a letter out. I saw some memes from like, people being like, imagine what Christian Horner and Max Verstappen think reading that. But I was like, well, yeah, but Mercedes won 8 straight championships, and then last year won 1 race. They've come into this season and they're a long way off the pace. So it just shows you, that culture of winning is still ingrained in them. And, they feel this badly about the fact that they've slipped down the order. So, yeah, if that's anything, if you base the rest of the season based on a letter, then maybe there's reasons to be hopeful if you're Mercedes, because it shows kind of a fighting spirit, right? They're not going to just lie down and take it.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.